Hi, I'm Dr. Charlene Walters, author, business and branding mentor, trainer, as well as your host for Launch, a business talk show for anyone who wants to launch their business, their career, or their life. Hi everyone, it's Charlene Walters, your host, hoping to help you launch your business and your life. I am here today with Jason Feifer, editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. He's also a podcast host, an author, and an all-around great guy. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I am so glad you can join us. I think it's so important to tell people a little bit about their backstories because often someone sees someone like you at the top of your career and they think that you just clicked your fingers and made it happen. But we know that's not the case. So tell us a little bit about your background and your journey.
Right, sure. Well, look, it's funny. I would push back on top of my career. Of course, if this was the top of my career, then everything else would be downhill, and that sounds terrible. So I would say that I'm happy where I am right now. How about that? So I started as a community newspaper reporter in a tiny town in north central Massachusetts, just writing about nothing, as like nothing was happening, and I was there for a year and a half. Maybe a little less. And I eventually came to one of the most important realizations of my career while I was there, which is that I aspired to work, I didn't know what it was, somewhere big, somewhere to big national publication, something, I didn't know. I knew it wasn't where I was. And I eventually came to understand nobody at the places that I wanted to work, nobody at the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or wherever it was that I wanted to work, the New Yorker, none of those people, zero of them, were ever reading the little tiny newspaper that I was working at. I could write my heart out at that place and it wouldn't allow me to jump a bunch of steps and get to where I dreamed of being. And instead, all it might do was get me a slightly larger newspaper job and a slightly larger one and a slightly larger one. And I'd be 87 years old by the time that I got somewhere I was excited to go. And so I realized they won't come to me. I have to go to them. I quit that job and I sat in my bedroom literally in a rural part of Massachusetts, next to a graveyard, dumpy apartment. And I just started cold pitching editors and I started getting into some of these large places and I started to build my career that way. And it's always been like that ever since. I always think I'm going to go to them. I'm never waiting around for someone to come to me.
You know what? And it never ends. It just keeps going that way. And it's great to hear you say that. And I'm sure the audience would love to know that as well. Along those lines, you've talked to so many successful people and famous people. What do they all have in common, would you say?
Well, they all have the ability to adapt. That's it. The most successful people are adapters. They are willing to break with what came before, even though it worked, and they are able to reinvent themselves, their ideas. Charlene, literally just before this call with you, I was talking to an old friend of mine, Stacey London, who had a show called What Not to Wear for many years, and she just became the CEO and I think majority owner. I don't know. She didn't say majority. She's bought a bunch of the majority shares, something, whatever. Who knows? I'm talking out of my butt. Of a company called State of Menopause that she's really, really passionate and excited about. And we talked a bunch about how she went through a transition of being really, it was really hard for her to let go of a previous identity that she had as someone on television and a TV personality. And now she's moving into being a CEO and a brand builder where it's not all about her, where she's not front and center. And I asked her, what was it like? What was the process of making that kind of transition? And she said, she had to step back and take the advice that she has given so many people before, which is that you can't you can't be that person that just holds on to something old. You have to let it go. You can't go to the next part of your life until you let go of the older part of your life. And it's a hard thing to do. And she had given that advice a ton of times. And then when it came for her to actually do it, it was a journey and a process. But eventually she got there, and she is so thrilled with what she's doing now. And that's awesome to hear.
I think that is such excellent advice. You know, people are living longer than ever before. We have to have those 100-year plans. We have to keep reinventing ourselves, particularly now during this pandemic and as we come out of it. Speaking of which, you talk to a lot of people in your job. Has anyone ever said or done anything that has really surprised you?
Yeah, well, people say things all the time to me that I'm just delighted by and will jot down. I guess one of the most recent that I really loved was when I interviewed Ryan Reynolds, and we were talking about his own transition from being an actor, which he still does, but now he also owns a number of companies, and he runs very actively a marketing agency called Maximum Effort. And how difficult that transition was, not because he wasn't excited about it, but because he didn't know how to do any of this stuff. And he said, these are just great words. He said that his line that he always uses is, you can't be good at something unless you're willing to be bad. Yeah. And isn't that perfect? Because it's true. When you start out on doing something, you're not going to be very good at it. And you have to be okay with being bad for a while to be able to get to being good.
You are absolutely right. There is so much value in falling down. That's how we learn. That's how we move forward. And you said you got to talk to Ryan Reynolds, which is so cool. Along those same lines, has there ever been a time you were scheduled to interview somebody, a big celebrity, someone famous, and you just sort of were such a big fan, kind of awestruck? Were you a little nervous ever going into one?
No, not in my line of work. I would be nervous approaching people on the street, because then I'm just one random person vying for their attention, and I know what they're going to do, which is that most of them, some people will just straight up ignore you, but most people they'll try to give you the minimum amount so that they feel like they've fulfilled some expectation, but they're able to go throughout their day. And so there are plenty of people whose work I really admire, who if I saw Elon Musk at a restaurant once, and there was my friends and family. I was with my wife and some friends were telling me, go up and say hi, say you're the editor-in-chief of the magazine. I'm not going to do that. That's silly. but if we have a, it's all about setting, right? If we have an interview scheduled and they have set aside time for me, and they also understand the context in which I'm going to talk to them, I don't really get nervous about anybody. I mean, I've interviewed, The Rock, LeBron James, once there's some understanding of the setting in which we're talking, I've gotten to the point where I don't get nervous, but I wouldn't approach them in a restaurant.
That's so great. I probably would have gone up to Elon Musk, but that's just me. I'm a little pushy, I guess. So you do get pitched at all the time, speaking of which. And I love your Inbox Mondays on Instagram. For anyone who's not following Jason, you should at Hey Feifer. Tell us a little bit about that and what makes a really great pitch.
Yeah, so every Monday on my Instagram, which is, as you just said, at Hey Feifer, HeyFeifer, I grab something, usually out of my own inbox. Occasionally somebody has shared something with me, and I share why it was good or bad. Why did it work? Why did it not? And it's not just about pitching media. I try to really make this just about communication, about reaching out, because to pitch the media is not really all that different from pitching an investor or a customer or a potential partner or whatever. It's all the same. And that is, you have to understand what they're looking for before you put forward what you're looking for, right? You have to, and this is what I say this on Instagram all the time, you can't ask for an opportunity, you have to be the opportunity. The more that you do research into what somebody is looking for, how they respond to things, what problem can you solve for them, the more you can do that, the more that they're going to be interested in you. Because let's face it, everybody is interested primarily in themselves. And I don't mean that in some sort of terrible, selfish way. It's just the case. when you go about your day, you are largely looking to build the thing that you have. And so that means you want to work with people who are going to be able to help you do that. So the more that you can come with any kind of pitch that understands the mindset and the goals of the people that you're reaching out to, the better you're going to be at actually getting their attention.
Yes, it's so important for us to be good at pitching and selling no matter what, but particularly as entrepreneurs. And talking about entrepreneurs, I read a stat the other day that really surprised me. 4.4 million Americans started businesses during 2020, right during the middle of the pandemic. Why do you think that is, and what can we expect from entrepreneurs moving forward?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting, great number. We saw during 2020 that there was a decade high in new business applications in America. And what's the reason for that? I think it's pretty obvious and straightforward. People were laid off, people's lives imploded. And the only thing that they had that they could do was the only thing they had was themselves. The only thing that they had was themselves and their ideas. And they felt like now is the time where I'm going to have to build something for myself because nobody else is going to do it for me. I mean, there's a term, an economic term for people who go into entrepreneurship, not because they have a crazy dream and they're Steve Jobs, but because they got laid off. It's called necessity entrepreneurship. And this is, I think, what we saw a lot of, but I think we saw a lot of necessity entrepreneurship, but I think, frankly, we probably also saw a lot of people who might have been working some corporate jobs, some retail job. They always had an idea of something that they would do, that they wanted to build, but they put it off. It's too hard. I don't know how to do it. I don't have time for it. And suddenly they had the time and they're going to go for it. And I think that's really exciting.
Absolutely. And so many people took advantage of that downtime we had. We were stuck at home. What better time to get your plans together for your business? Speaking of which, are there any industries or businesses that you think we'll see a spike in coming up as we emerge?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that I caveat this anytime anyone asks me to predict the future. I think that we as people are collectively terrible at predicting the future, just because the lines are not straight. And I can't say that because this happened, this is going to happen. History tells us that's not how things work. But I think that we can make some basic assumptions here, right? Which is that, one, there's going to be massive pent-up demand. So anything that people weren't able to do in the past year, which of course is a lot, I think that people are going to want to do double, triple. They're going to want to make up for lost time. So restaurants are going to be obviously extremely packed. We're already seeing that hotel reservations, especially at nice resorts, are becoming very hard to get and they're very expensive. And I think that's going to go on for a while. Airplane tickets are going to spike, I'm sure. People are going to be super psyched to be going back to concerts. So, all that kind of stuff is going to be true.
Totally. I have 3 vacations lined up already myself, one to New York, which brings me to my next question. You famously moved out of New York to Colorado with your parents. Tell us about that. What has it been like? What have you learned? What are your takeaways?
Yeah, well, I don't know how famously it was, but I did. I am still here in Boulder, Colorado. That's why there's a painting of a bear behind me. I'm in my mom's office. That's where I tend to work. And we came out here last March because we have 2 small children and we live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Park Slope. And we had another option. Not everyone does. We were extremely fortunate, but our option was that we could fly to Colorado and stay with my parents. They were willing to do it. They had the space, and we've been here ever since. And we're going to go back in the summer. And I've learned quite a lot. I've learned that I like bicycling, which I didn't realize before. But I'll tell you, the big thing that isn't really just about me, but is I think about anybody who goes through a moment like this, is that I learned that there wasn't only one way to do things. So I love living in New York, and I never considered living elsewhere. But coming out here, it's a completely different. It's basically suburban. And for a while, I was kind of grumpy about it. But then I surprised myself and came to enjoy it and found the things that I'm really enjoying. I mean, I'm looking forward to going back to New York too, but it taught me that there isn't only one way.
That's awesome. And speaking of which, do you think so many of us became remote workers during the pandemic? Do you think that will persist and people will continue to work from home? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that the story of all innovation throughout history is that we never really wholesale replace, we always integrate. So whenever something new comes along, people tend to be very concerned about it because they see it as a replacement for whatever they liked before. The musicians at the dawn of the phonograph, the recorded music technology, were so opposed to it because they thought that it was going to eradicate all forms of live music. Why would you ever have a concert? Why would anyone ever learn an instrument when it can be just played on a record? Of course, that's not true. What ended up happening is that we have a mixture of both. We listen to recorded music. There's also lots of opportunities for live music. So I think that the same is really going to be true for this new moment where we're going to go back. We learned that remote working can be really valuable, but we're not going to want to trade out every single part of what we knew before. I think that what we'll see is a mixture. There will be either some companies that stay entirely remote and some companies that go back in full, and then there'll be some companies that do some kind of mix. I think that it's all going to get sorted out, but I think we have introduced a new option, and that option isn't as scary or looked down upon as it used to be. And we'll figure out probably by an individual basis or by a company basis how the mix works for each of us.
There's been, so much prejudice against it previously. I've been working remote for a long time, for years before the pandemic, and I really battled that. So I'm glad it's gaining popularity and acceptance.
Me too.
But although there are so many people that talk about Zoom burnout now, that's like a common everyday kind of statement from people. In general, entrepreneurs are more likely to suffer from burnout than anyone else. Why is that? What do you do to avoid burnout? What are your suggestions? And what do you do to stay balanced? I think you're really good about doing various things in that regard.
Thanks. Well, so I was recently talking to Jim Quick, who is a world-renowned brain coach, author of this book that actually I just happen to see sitting next to me, so I'll just show it to you. Limitless. And he had a nice line, which I don't know if I can remember exactly, but he said entrepreneurs aren't burning out because they're doing too many things. They're burning out because they're not doing enough of the things that they love. Yeah. And I think that that's right. I mean, I push myself very hard. I at the end of every day, I'm exhausted and there's still infinitely more to do. And yet the reason that I'm excited every day, the next day to get up and work and not feel burned out is because I'm doing a lot of the things that I'm really excited about. And that doesn't mean that you just have to you either get a job that you love or you build a job that you love and it's either that or you're going to hate whatever you're doing, because there's so many other ways to do this. I do a million things. I have the job at Entrepreneur, which I love. I don't love every single minute of it, right? There are tasks that I don't enjoy doing. Sometimes I'm editing a story and it's going to take all day, and I'll be excited that when it's done, I'll be proud of it, but I'm not enjoying the process as it goes. But there's that. But then there are all these other things that I come up with that I'm really excited to create, like a podcast that I have, which I'm wearing the shirt of right now, Build for Tomorrow. And this is a show that I've been working on for years. And I'm constantly finding ways to channel my energy towards things that I'm really excited about, while also doing all the things that are required of me so that I'm doing a good job for everyone who relies upon me.
I totally agree. I get up every day, same thing. I'm excited to see what's next. And I think the podcasts are amazing. You have 3 podcasts. Can you tell us a little bit about all of them and why podcasting has just gained so much popularity? People are listening more, they're creating their own. What do you enjoy most about it?
Sure. Well, so it's funny. I've started to say 2 now because one of my shows is on hiatus, and I don't know when we're going to be able to get back to it. That one was called Hush Money, and then Problem Solvers is the show that you've been on for Entrepreneur. My primary focus, though, really is the Build for Tomorrow one because so many things have grown out of it, and this really goes to your question about the power of podcasting. I mean, I started this podcast. I didn't know who it would reach. I didn't know how to make a podcast. And years later, it has attracted some of the smartest names in business and tech and academia who reach out to me and love the show. It's a foundation reached out and writes me a grant. I sold a book deal based out of the podcast. So a lot of things. I've started to think of the podcast as really like an IP factory, right? The show it has a nice listenership. The show doesn't make me retirement money, right? It doesn't even make make me enough money where I would ever consider right now, like saying, I don't need entrepreneur, I'm going to go do this podcast. It doesn't make me that kind of money, but it's an IP factory. It's forcing me to create all sorts of really fascinating intellectual property. That stuff attracts fans. And it's been a really joyous ride.
I totally agree. And I can tell all of the effort and work you put into yours. So kudos to you. What general advice would you give to anyone who's starting anything, but particularly maybe as an entrepreneur? What is your general everyday advice that you hand out?
Start. Just start. Right? I mean, that's it. It's just start. You can ask, you don't have to just take that from me. Go ask the most impressive, successful people in business, and they will all tell you some version of the same thing. I mean, the way that Reid Hoffman says it is, well, he has two lines. One is that entrepreneurship is jumping off a cliff and building the airplane on the way down. Yeah. And then the other one is that if you're not embarrassed by your first product launch, then you launched too late. The idea being that you can't come out with something perfect. You can't create perfection. You can't incubate it like birthing a baby and then put it out into the world. It doesn't work like that. What you do instead is you put out the best you got. And then you learn from it. And so what is that barrier? To me, to everybody I've ever talked to who has said the same thing, it really is, do you have something that you think people will engage with that you can learn from? If you've got that, start. Go put it out, start learning. It will not be perfect. It cannot be perfect. Nothing that you see in the world was created perfectly. No company. Airbnb did not come out of the gate looking like Airbnb does now. Nike did not come out of the gate. These are companies that learned along the way, and that's what you have to do too.
Perfection is absolutely the enemy of success. I totally agree. So you're doing lots of cool things. We talked about many of them, but you're also writing another book right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's called, you see the first part of it right here. It's called Build for Tomorrow, Not for Yesterday. And it's going to come out in the summer of 22. And it is a marriage. You've heard a little of the kind of stuff in this conversation that we've had. It's really a marriage of lessons from history, the history of innovation, and lessons from the greatest entrepreneurs, all driven towards how to find opportunity in change. I want to write the big idea book about what to do in a moment of change and how to move through it by moving through these four. At least this is how I'm writing it right now. I guess we'll see if my editor likes this structure. But I'm moving through what I think are the four stages of a moment of change, which is panic, adaptation, new normal, and wouldn't go back. And so that's how I'm walking people through it. And I knew that writing a book along with everything else that I was going to do was going to be hard. And I've confirmed that. But I got to work on the book for an hour today, which felt like a real accomplishment.
How is your wife coping with you being so busy?
She is really busy too. I mean, one of the things that we bonded over very early on in dating was that we both really understood each other, and that we have a lot of goals, and we're ambitious, and we're doing a lot of things. And so she's pretty understanding. Although, last night when I was editing at like 11 p.m., she started sending me texts saying, time for bed, time for bed, time for bed. But, that's okay.
You're lucky that you both have each other to support each other through all of your busyness, and you're both doing such great things. That's really amazing. Okay, I want to play a little fun game with you. It's called If You Tell Me Yours, I'll Tell You Mine. So what do you have for breakfast?
So I go in phases where I eat the exact same thing for months, and then I get sick of it, and then I move on to something else. So right now I have a toaster waffle with peanut butter and then sliced bananas on top.
Oh, awesome. I always have the same thing every day too. I have Earl Grey tea and an English muffin.
Yeah.
What's your favorite city?
I mean, I guess the answer is New York, because that's where I technically live, though I haven't been there in a year. But that feels boring. So I'll tell you that when my wife and I play the game, as I'm sure everybody plays, of where else would we live, or when we travel, could we live here? The city that we keep coming back to is Berlin. So I would really love at some point in my life to just spend a year or a few months or something, just kind of settling down in Berlin and really getting to know it. I've been there a few times, but it's always been too short.
I haven't been there yet, but that would be great. My favorite, I think it's a tie between Paris and San Diego. You just can't beat San Diego, in my opinion. What is your favorite movie?
Huh. It's funny. I used to watch a lot of movies and now I don't have time for them. So I'm going to tell you my answer as it was like 10 years ago, which was Lost in Translation.
Oh,
That Sofia Coppola movie. I don't know. That thing just really hit me. I loved Lost in Translation.
I did too. I didn't appreciate it as much as when I was younger, and I rewatched it recently and I thought, oh, I really understand this a little bit better now that I'm older. So something about time passing.
Yeah.
For me, I love a couple of old ones too. I love Always and Steel Magnolias. I think you just can't go wrong with those two movies.
Classics.
They are total classics. Our last question for this game is, what was the one thing you couldn't have lived without during this pandemic?
I mean, so the first answers are all the obvious, boring answers. I could not have lived without my computer or my iPhone. That's how I did all my things. I couldn't have lived without microphones. The amount of podcasting that I did in the last year. But those are all boring. So I'm going to say that the answer is actually a bicycle, because that was a totally new thing to me. And it definitely helped me appreciate the new situation that I was in. And I realized how better I feel if I spend an hour on, doing some physical exercise. So we've had a couple warm days in Boulder as we're talking now every time I'm about to say what month I'm in, I'm like, do I know what month? We're talking in early April, 2021. It's still like we get a couple warm days and then we get a bunch of cold days, but I cannot wait for consistent warmth so that I can get back out there.
I totally hear you. So my one thing that I couldn't have lived without is early on in the pandemic, I bought a rowing machine because everybody was stuck at home. And I'm like, I couldn't go to the gym anymore. I love that rowing machine. That has been my saving grace throughout this whole pandemic. We're coming to the end here. So Jason, where can everyone find out more about you and connect with you and learn more about all the great things you're doing?
Awesome. Well, find this wherever you find podcasts, Build for Tomorrow. And then also you can go to my website, which is jasonfeifer.com, JASON, F as in Frank, EI, F as in Frank, ER, where you can find links to all my work. And then also if you go up to the top of the page and click free training, you will get my free audio course on how to become more adaptable. So I would strongly suggest checking that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. We learned a lot today. It was a lot of fun as always. We will see you next time here on Launch.